So Transformers 1, as I mentioned, ninth Transformers movie, but the first animated feature film that we've gotten since 1986. We have gotten 7 live action movies in the
Wow.
time since 1986. There have been other animated television shows. There have been some animated movies that I think have hit streaming, but it's been about 35, 36 years since they've released a theatrically animated feature film. My first question to you before we dive into this review: what took them so long? Why did they stay away from animation for such a long time on this grand scale of releasing a theatrically animated feature film?
I don't even know if I have a real answer for you, bro. I will say the live action movies made money. They made money. Money, people were going to go see them Transformers films, man. Them live action joints. And I don't know if they enjoyed just how ridiculous and crazy they were, or they liked Michael Bay. I don't know what was going on and why they love those movies so much, but they did. And I think that's one of the reasons why they stuck with that live action formula for so long, is because they might not have been working technically necessarily from a critical perspective, but from a commercial perspective, I think they were always they were always doing what they needed to do for the most part. So I think that's why they stayed away to a degree from what animation for Transformers animation was. And so here we are now, I guess, so many years later. But yeah, it's crazy to see that we have this many live action Transformers films. That would never not be surprising to me.
Yeah, I think for a long time, there was an idea that you would just do one or the other. And live action was typically the bread and butter. More people would typically see live action movies, and there had been a ton of animated television shows. I grew up on a number of them. Beast Wars was seminal to my childhood. And
Yeah.
so the idea of transitioning into live action was appealing, and it made all the sense in the world, because now we have the technology and the tools to make it a believable thing, to where the CG technology can catch up and to make Transformers into live action feature films that were on the hugest screens possible. And totally agree, from a commercial standpoint, they worked. And again, I think for a long time studios just kind of chose one or the other. They didn't do
Mm-hmm.
both. But it's interesting that I think that whole thing and thought process has changed, in particular over the past, I would say, 6 or 7 years, because now we're seeing multiple franchises now tackle both. They are doing both live action and animation, these dueling sort of franchises. And I think that there might have been a fear and a hesitation on the part of studios at creating things that would seemingly compete against one another. But
Mm-hmm.
because animation has blown up so much from a theatrical going standpoint, that's just not even a thing really anymore. I think the people that want to go see animated movies will go to see them, and the
Yeah.
people that want the live action will go to see those. And there is some overlap. They won't always overlap, but there is a big portion of the audience that will overlap and just enjoy whatever the output of both of those things are, even as different as they may be. I attribute a lot of that to the Spider-Verse films. The fact
Yep.
that Sony was able to make Into the Spider-Verse while we were still getting Tom Holland movies, and they both were
Mm-hmm.
successful. It's like, oh, studios, yeah, why can't we just do both? Why can't we just have like multiple Ninja Turtle movies in theaters, or multiple Transformers movies in theaters, one live action, one animated? So I like that we're back here. I think it just took some time for studios to realize, like, you don't have to limit yourselves. You can just
Mm-hmm.
take more risks, and you can go this way. And so we'll unpack that idea more and talk a little bit more about that as we get deeper into this conversation. But let's not waste any more time and get into our official review of the ninth feature film in the Transformers franchise, Transformers 1. Now, this movie is directed by Josh Cooley. It's written by Eric Pearson, Andrew Barrer, and Gabriel Ferrari, and it's starring Chris Hemsworth, Brian Tyree Henry, Scarlett Johansson, Keegan Michael Key, Steve Buscemi, Lawrence Fishburne, and John Hamm. So we're going to do something a little bit different here today. We're going to talk about this movie with spoilers. We're going to dive in and talk about Transformers and talk about some of the big themes and things that happen in the course of this movie, as well as the franchise and the state of the franchise as a whole. But before we dive in too deep and get to that discussion a little bit later in this podcast, we're just going to start off, as we typically do, with our general reactions and big picture thoughts about this new Transformers feature film that we got a chance to go check out this past weekend. They have been developing this movie for a number of years. It first was starting to be developed back around 2014, 2015, after the release of Transformers Age of Extinction, which was the fourth Michael Bay feature film. Paramount said, hey, we're going to develop this world even more. We want more ideas, more projects on the table. Let's figure out how to continue to make Transformers movies. And I think
Mhm.
anything was on the table. They obviously did make another Michael Bay feature film. They ultimately came out with the Bumblebee spinoff film. Now we know the franchise on the live action front has been sort of semi rebooted almost to a certain extent, and have brought in other sort of variations of the Transformers that we know with the Rise of the Beasts movie that came out last year. But
Yeah.
now, again, this animated feature film is returning the franchise to, I think, what a lot of people know it as. Not only is, of course, the hugely successful toy franchise, but
Mhm.
because there was the animated feature film in 1986, and there were a lot of television series that were animated, this is kind of getting back to the basics and the foundational aspects of this franchise. And so, with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it to you. What were your general big picture thoughts about this new feature film, Transformers One?
Yeah, I have to preface this by saying quite a few episodes on the podcast ago, we did our most anticipated releases. And my number 9 spot out of my top 10 was this movie, Transformers 1. And part of that was everything we talked about a second ago, where just it has been since 1986 since we have gotten a Transformers animated movie. And for a lot of people, again, after those other 7 8 movies went by of live action, you're like, I'm tired of Transformers, I don't want to do this anymore, go away. There was something in me that said, oh, we're going to animate it again. Where I learned where Transformers was the first time I think I seen Transformers a cartoon before I actually probably seen the toy. That's just how it worked in my life. And then I ended up seeing toys and getting toys, all of that things. But I really do love Transformers, not because of the live action movies, but because of the TV shows, like you said, discussed when we were younger. So I was excited for this animated return the form. I like the voice cast. The trailer was okay, but I was still excited to see some animated Transformers come into this thing, and I'm glad to say that I had a good time with this movie. This movie doesn't necessarily reinvent the wheel of what movie structure is or anything like that, but it is a fun time of a reimagining of what we know the Transformers to be. Not all for good. This movie is not without flaws, not all for good, but it does take us back to a time of Transformers that I had never seen before just a lot of things transpired in what you know to be Transformers lore. A lot of those things hadn't existed yet or come to fruition. Who the heck are the primes? Who were It kind of goes back to just us figuring out what a lot of things are in this world. And I thought that was refreshing. A lot of people don't know that don't know these things, or a lot of these things they were inventing for the first time, a lot of these ideas. And so I had fun with that. I had fun being like, okay, I know how we get to this point in Transformers world, but how are you going to get us there? I thought that was a fun concept and a fun thing for them to play on and for them to do. But this film does take us on a fun little ride. It's funny, but the comedy doesn't necessarily, I think, take over the movie either. It does feel like a traditional action adventure animation film. And for that, man, I had fun with it. I feel like I laughed when I needed to. It was fun seeing this with a nerdy Transformers crowd, because I feel like we cheered when we needed to cheer. It was just, I think, a good animated time in the theater. Again, it's not without its flaws. There are some things that they try to reinvent that I don't know if they should have tried to reinvent that, because it's not like it's been there, done that. I'll talk about that in the spoiler part, but there's some things there. It's like I don't know if we had to go in that direction, but I like the animation. I like the voice cast. I like the way the movie felt. In general, it was just a fun watch in the theater for Transformers, and it made me remember and realize this is what Transformers could have been hadn't we wasted all this time. We could have been having more talks about movies like this, more animated Transformers movies that are doing something different and they're trying new things. I wish we could have had more discussions about things like this, but they're just now arriving at this place. And so this movie does feel like, dang, it's a little too late for us to be doing this, but I'm still glad it exists because I had a good time with it.
So I have often said, and I still maintain, I am not really a fan of prequel stories, prequel films, prequel television series, but there are always exceptions to the rule. There's very few, and those exceptions typically do add in new layers and new dimensions to the characters that we probably are already familiar with, and they also get you to look at the other material and media from that particular franchise or property differently. You can look at it through a new lens because you learned
Mhm.
something. And it was always interesting that on the live action theatrical scale, we had never taken the time to do something of an origin story to learn where the Transformers came from, because those films focus so much on the human characters, because you kind of have to in a live action movie. Otherwise, it'll be the most expensive movie ever made if it's just completely set on Cybertron. But that's a conversation for another day. But now with Transformers 1, because it is animated and they decided to do something a little bit different and go back in time and to explore the relationship between characters we know, and really hone in on why they became the way that they became and how they ascended to their different leadership styles. I'm happy to say that Transformers 1 is a triumphant return to form for the franchise. This is something that is exciting, it's resonant, it has a strong voice cast, it has some really really gorgeous animation, which I was hesitant about based on the first trailer, but seeing it on the big screen, seeing it come to life, the animation for the most part is beautiful, and you get a story that's really focused purely on the Transformers. There is not a single human character to be found here. And that's something
Mhm.
that fans have been asking for a long time, ever since we got those live action movies. But now this is offering that, and it's also offering, I think, a really fresh entry point for either returning fans or new fans to the franchise. Because if you're a new fan, this is a great place to start, and then to go revisit all of those other films that we got, to revisit other television shows. But if you've been here, like I've been here, like you've been here, this is just a nice revisiting of why we love these characters the way that we do. But then also, I think, in addition to that, adding on a few new levels of dimension and a few new layers to their characteristics to see how they became who they became to be in later films, later television series, so on and so forth. And so I really enjoyed this movie quite a lot. I think it's quite possibly the most successful Transformers movie since the 1986 Transformers animated feature film. It's not necessarily the highest bar to cross. Let's be honest about that. But what they're able to do here, it worked for me. It's pretty terrific. Again, the voice cast, really, really strong stuff. Surprised me in a lot of ways that I did not see coming. And overall, it created a story that I found myself to be pretty affected by, and I thought worked for the most part. It's not perfect. There are some cliches and some tropes that are very familiar, some things that are absolutely predictable and maybe a little
Mhm.
rushed in certain instances, but that didn't take away from my enjoyment of the film. I thought that they did a pretty good job here. So I really enjoyed Transformers 1, and I'm excited that this was possible, that we were able to pull this off and make this a new sort of addition and entry point into this larger huge franchise that's been in existence for such a long time. But let's talk about some of the details with this movie. Let's talk about some of the themes and some of the spoilers, some of the big events.
Yeah.
So, if you've not seen Transformers 1, as I said, we're going to do something a little bit different today and dive into this movie. This is your spoiler warning. If you don't want to know anything about this movie, definitely pause this podcast, give yourself a chance to watch it, because we're going to talk about all the big things that happen and then come back and finish the rest of our conversation. And I just want to start off top, obviously, what this movie's about. The core theme is really kind of about the relationship between Optimus Prime and Megatron, who,
Yep.
in this film, they don't have even those names that we know them as. Optimus Prime is called Orion Pax, and Megatron is called D16. I'll just preface this to say I'm not calling them that. They are going to be Optimus Prime and
Yes.
Megatron for me, because
Thank you.
I don't need to
Yes.
remember that. But that's really what this film is about. And they are voiced respectively by Chris Hemsworth, who's voicing Optimus Prime, and Brian Tyree Henry, who's voicing Megatron. But it's really just about their relationship, their friendship, and sort of their gradual decaying trust of each other, the eroding trust that happened between these two, and how they became friends turned to adversaries, and ultimately
Mhm.
enemies, that we know them as. This is one of the most, I think, famous pairings really in pop culture. When you think about Batman and Joker, or Superman and Lex Luthor, whoever you
Yeah.
want to throw on the table, you think about Optimus Prime and Megatron. They are forever enemies. And so this movie showcases that descent of that relationship, that gradual decay of their trust and friendship for one another. What do you want to say about just like the film focusing on that? Some of the beats that they decided to introduce to show us how that happened, how that sort of took place over the course of the film, ultimately for us to discover who they became to be ultimately as Optimus Prime and Megatron, respectively.
To be honest, bro, I don't know if I was like checked out or I didn't realize it, but it took me a second to be like, wait, is that supposed to be Megatron? It took me so long because in the beginning of the film, again, their names are different. And I knew that I was like, okay, I know you're supposed to be Optimus Prime, but I don't know who I thought D16 was supposed to be. I'm like, are you Ironhide? Like, I don't know where I was in my head, but it took me a second to until there is a moment where they're talking about the primes and all the who the strongest primes are. And he was like, oh, Megala whatever prime was like my hero or whatever. And I was like, oh, you're supposed to be Megatron. I understand that. Like, it took me all the way up to that point to realize who he was. But that might be a good thing. You know what I mean? It might be a good thing to be like, oh shoot, I didn't know who this was supposed to be. But it's a cool idea, man. I think well, it's a bittersweet idea for me because there is something here for me that's like, oh, friends turn adversaries. It's not like we haven't done that before. You know what I mean? There's like there is something there that's very too familiar and very too like, oh, that's the dang, we have to go back here again. But I think the way they flush it out is a little bit different, only because they really legit come from the slums and the scraps and like they've been in all these like I don't know, weird, sad situations together. And to see how much of a backseat, I think their personalities are interesting too here because to see how much of a backseat that Megatron used to take, I think, a little bit to Optimus Prime in their minor form was interesting. I expected him to be more, I think, vocal of a lot of the things. But really, from the beginning, Optimus Prime has always had kind of like this leadership to him versus Megatron. Kind of the beginning, he was very passionate about how he felt, but he wasn't like Optimus was like a go getter, and Megatron was legit a worker. Like he was all about work and doing this thing. And I think, like you said, it recontextualizes everything because I would not have thought Megatron to be like this worker, go get him kind of person in the beginning. So it's a very bittersweet thing for me because it definitely adds some layers to these characters. But I thought it was a cool way, I think, to examine their relationship and where they start. Even the idea again of making them minors, nobody's a prime, nobody's super built up yet. I thought that was a good idea, and it's like, okay, how do we get there? But yeah, I like that beginning and that I guess that humble start to their relationship of them kind of being somewhat, I guess, brothers in the rough. You know what I mean? I didn't expect that.
Yeah, in terms of just the dynamic, brothers turned enemies, friends turned enemies. It's certainly it's a constant thread throughout most stories that we see that
Yeah.
examine a relationship from the standpoint. I mean, Josh Cooley has not been shy about what influenced him. Him talking about X-Men being a big influence and the relationship
Hmm.
between Professor X and Magneto, but even other films like Ben-Hur, Ten Commandments, biblical stories where we see this.
Right.
That's a whole thing
Exactly.
that's just been a part of storytelling for thousands and thousands of years, and it works. It does work if you can do it effectively, and I like that we do explore that here because the piece of it that I didn't see coming was the fact that they are miners for Cybertron. Like they're just like
Hmm.
working and working and working, and there is levels of ambition on the part of both of them, and I think that that's another big thing that comes out, just like their levels of ambition, but how that ambition can go in a very different direction if you allow it to consume you. We find out that
Right.
Megatron's ambition leads him down what we would, I think, consider and classify as a path of tyranny, whereas Optimus Prime's ambition leads him to liberation, freedom, discovering yourself, living up to your fullest potential, whatever that idea may be. And we see the beginnings of that in just
Hmm.
their workship, on this planet, and how they're constantly just sort of beat down, over and over. The Sentinel Prime, who's like the head of Cybertron, who's masterminding all of this, he doesn't care about the miners at all. He presents himself as like a really affable, loving guy, as somebody that's to be trusted, but we find out that that's obviously not the case. And that affects them differently. And so I like that was like the device and the method that used us to get to that endpoint, that we ultimately knew was coming, that they're going to go down different paths, very different paths, but we see them super friendly with each other, very much in the throes of it, in the thick of it, and they're just trying to like get ahead and kind of uncover some things. We see that Optimus is trying to look for this matrix of leadership, discover more about that. D16 also wants to kind of get out of their circumstance and get out of capture and not necessarily be minors anymore. All of that stuff, I found it to be good. I do think that like the opening few minutes of the movie were kind of meandering for a bit. Like
Yeah.
I was waiting for it to really get going, and I think that probably towards the end of the first act, like they had that whole big race sequence.
The
That
race. Yep.
that's where it really got going for me, and then
I
we kind
agree.
of meet Sentinel Prime, and they get thrown down into the deeper levels of Cybertron. That's where the movie felt like it came alive
Mhm.
for me, and I think that they did a good job building up to that. But I was a little worried, I won't lie, about those first few minutes. But they got there. They definitely got there, and you got to see just how that all came to be and how that all took shape. Another thing I do want to talk about is just like Cybertron and just like how they brought that to life. We haven't spent a ton of time on this planet in a really long
Mhm.
time. And animation allows them to do certain things that, again, just probably wouldn't be possible or feasible in live action. How did you feel about just the representation, the look of Cybertron, knowing that this was going to be a fully realized environment that we were going to explore a lot of throughout the course of this movie, and kind of spend more time here than we really ever have, especially on a theatrical scale?
It might have been the best scaled Cybertron, possibly of all time, that I've ever seen. I think even I'm thinking about animated. I'm thinking about even the small glimpses you even see in live action. Like in terms of scale, I was like, "Whoa, this place is huge." You know what I mean? And I think I never really felt the scale of what it was supposed to be before. Because of course, there is like this is a whole planet, but I don't know for some reason when I see it in other depictions, I think of it as a size of a moon, not necessarily the size of like Earth. You know what I mean? This felt like the size of Earth. I was like, no, this place is ginormous. There are robots everywhere. And I thought it was very well done in that way. But I also love to see the colors and how there's highways and byways and like you say, even talking about how there's different jobs for people. There's miners. There are certain people who can still transform, like who we were just talking about with Sentinel Prime, and like it was just like, whoa, there's a lot to talk about and to go through here. But even when you see the race, you're like, yo, there's a lot of y'all. Like for real, there's a lot of people that exist within this place. And even the concept of the way their highways work, where you're seeing a highway moving and building as you're moving onto it, is like, no, this place has to be big in order for that to even make sense. In order to have space for a place to be able to do that, this place has to be big. So I thought it was pretty impressive the way they were able to show the scale of Cybertron itself. It might have been one my favorite depiction of Cybertron thus far.
Yeah, this is a society at the end of the day, and I think oftentimes, in particular in live action, anytime we saw brief glimpses of Cybertron, it's like, this place doesn't really look inhabitable. It doesn't look like anybody lives
Mm-hmm.
here. It looks like a
Right.
battleground, which I think when the war for Cybertron kicks off, it probably will turn into a battleground for the most part and look very apocalyptic and desolate.
Right.
But at least for now, in terms of it being a thriving society, is what it appears to be. I mean, this was gorgeous stuff. I mean, I love what they did here. It looked really, really fantastic, and I just love the levels of everything that you see, which they actually illustrate that not only through the characters and the work that they do. As you mentioned, you have levels to the society, as you do with any society. There are working class people, there are middle class
Mm-hmm.
people, there are wealthy people at the top. We see that because everybody doesn't have the ability to transform, but they also visualize that in just the different places that we visit throughout Cybertron. We do go to those deep levels and layers underneath the surface, underneath the city, where it's like, oh, this isn't sexy at all. Like, y'all are down here slaving. It looks like a sweatshop down
Yeah.
here, and y'all are probably just relegated to be here and can't experience the beauty of this planet and what it has to offer. There's even that moment towards I would say the end of the second act going into the third act, where they come to the surface after they
Mm-hmm.
all gotten their new transformer, sort of
Mm-hmm.
bodies. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful because you kind of
Yeah.
see like some of like the plant life and just like all of these
Mm-hmm.
different shades and colors to this this different world that we just haven't spent a ton of time on. And so I thought it was really, really effective to just open this up and just take full advantage of what animation can offer and provide
Yeah.
us with just a new look into this world. I thought they did a really, really terrific job there. But speaking of that, I think also another big exciting component to this movie is not only Optimus Prime and Megatron, but it's also the other characters, that we would meet, the other Transformers, some that we did get to meet in this movie, others that they're probably holding for if there's going to be a future here. But, we met the earliest version of Bumblebee, voiced by Keegan Michael Key. We met a very early version of Starscream, in this movie. We see some of those Transformers, those
Yeah.
famous names that we know, kind of come into their own throughout the course of this movie, and I guess, for lack of a better term, find their own voice and develop into their own characters that we most famously know them as. What do you want to say about sort of any of the other supporting cast members who were part of this movie? Again, Keegan Michael Key was B127, aka Bumblebee. Steve Buscemi with Starscream.
Starscream.
That is amazing casting. I never would have predicted that, but that's
So
it's
funny.
actually kind of incredible to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you want to say about just what those characters brought to this movie?
Shout out to Key, man, for being Bumblebee. I thought it was pretty funny. The too talkative, or the guy that's too talkative, because it's funny because we know B is not to talk. That's the new B that we know. We have to talk through the radio. So going, to a prequel where he's allowed to say any and everything that comes to his mind actually worked. A lot of times the whole but that's a trying moment. I laughed almost every time. I don't know why. I was childish. I thought it was funny and that it made sense. But I thought he did a good job there. Also, the fact that one of the robots he named was Tron, 10 out of 10 callback. I thought that was great instead of Aaron. I was like, yeah, a lot of people aren't going to get that, but if you get it, you get it. That's pretty good. So shout out to him. Like you said, Steve Buscemi as Starscream. I don't know, it was genius. I just thought that was great. But seeing, yeah, some of the other Transformers just is really cool. Jazz was in like the beginning of the movie. They had to save Jazz from like the quarry, I guess, coming down on him. I thought that was cool to see Jazz. But all around, pretty good voice cast, man. Scarlett Johansson, as I keep forgetting her character's name.
Oh, Alita
Uh,
1.
Alita won, so shout out to her. I thought she did a pretty decent job. No complaints on the voice actor side of things. I thought they got to put together a pretty good slew of voice actors and pretty well known actors here. I thought it was pretty cool to like hear them and be like, wait, I know who that is. I kept doing that like over and over. Like, wait, I know who that is. So that was pretty cool for me.
It was an A-list voice cast for sure. Josh Cooley talked about he talked about a lot of things with the development of this movie and how influential that 1986 animated movie was. But he also pointed out how in that film they were able to get Orson Welles to voice one of the characters, and that was like the final performance of
Crazy.
Orson Welles before he passed away. And he was like,
Wow.
"Well, if they have Orson Welles, I have to put together a pretty impressive cast here." And I think he did a damn good job. I mean, these are all really, really heavy hitters, as we know. Nice to
Mhm.
have a little mini Avengers reunion with Scarlett Johansson and Chris Hemsworth. Steve Buscemi, he's a legend. He's one of my favorites. To hear him as Starscream, I was like, oh my god, that I never would have predicted it, but it makes a lot of sense,
So much.
especially when his voice gets distorted. Because we know
Yep.
Starscream to have the more screechy, loud voice, the higher pitched voice. Once we reached that moment, it was cool. But it was also like strange to see Starscream in a leadership position at the point that we meet him in the movie.
Yeah,
He
you're
was
right.
leading this high guard, and I'm like, that's
The High
that's.
Guard,
I'm like,
Starscream.
that's not Starscream. Starscream is like a whipping boy.
Yeah.
He's kind of Megatron's bitch as we know him. But
Mhm.
to see him in
Mhm.
this leadership position and then all of a sudden fall down the ranks, and for Steve Buscemi to be that person was also brilliant because that makes a
Brilliant.
lot of sense for the types of characters that Steve Buscemi has historically played. He's an unassuming guy, who finds his way to power typically in a lot of his roles, but you wouldn't look at him and say like that's the leader. So I love what they did there. But yeah, everybody was really impressive. I do want to focus even more though on Chris Hemsworth and Brian Tyree Henry and their voice acting
Yeah.
here because in the first maybe hour of the movie, it's like how are we going to get to these really iconic voices that we know? Peter
Mhm.
Cullen is Optimus Prime, one of
Peter
the most
Cullen.
recognizable voices in pop culture, and even Megatron, we know that deep baritone voice when we hear it. There's very very strong characteristics to these characters and how we hear them and how our relationship is developed because of our voice relationship with these particular characters. And look, Chris Hemsworth is an Australian putting on an American accent, right? And Brian Tyree Henry has a pretty distinctive voice too that you wouldn't
He
automatically
does.
peg as Megatron. But I found it just so compelling how the voices developed over the course of the
Mhm.
movie, and
I
you
agree.
can hear them. You can hear them go to deeper levels as we
Yep.
progress and get to like who we know them as. What did you think about just that maturation, them finding that voice and ultimately reaching that place that we associate with these characters, who we sort of hear them as and know them to be?
No, I was thinking the exact same thing as I was watching it. Like, whoa, these are y'all got some big shoes to fill, low key. I understand y'all minors right now, but we ain't minors no more. It's time to pull up. But like you said, there's legit a again something so self uh I I don't even know what to call it, man. It's like Inception almost. Like it's a movie called Transformers, and y'all ain't transformed yet. So it's like out of body experience. Like you legit have to transform your voice as the movie goes on. And I thought it was so impressive. By the end of it, you're like, it was one of the final shots of the movie, right? Chris Hemsworth is like Autobot something. And I was like, what a second. That wasn't Peter Cullen? Like I actually had to like
They brought in
I
Peter
just
Cullen for that one line.
yeah, like they made it pretty colorful that one line because whoa, what just happened? But it also made sense hearing that happen over time of their voices transform. They did such a good job. The darker that Megatron got, Brian Tyree Henry started to become that darker person. He started to get away from those again more hefty Autobot more ideas, and you're like, wait a second, you getting kind of evil here, dude. Like, what is going on? It's like the more pissed he got, the more his voice changed, and we stopped hearing the more nice side of Megatron, you know. And so I thought that was impressive the way they were able to do that, man. I know it's Chris Hemsworth and Brian Tyree Henry, two people I'm huge fans of, but I still was impressed by the way they were able to pull that off, man. One of my favorite, I think, thoughts and aspects of the movie. I'm really glad you brought it up.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the whole time I'm hearing Chris Hemsworth. I'm noticeably hearing him. I'm like, I enjoy you, and I'm going to give it a pass because these are the early stages of these characters, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's fine. And then you get to the final big action set piece, and Megatron finally makes that turn, that heel turn, and he's like,
Yeah.
"No, I'm doing this for me now, essentially." And then you
You know?
get Optimus Prime meeting all of the older Sentinel Primes and him becoming Optimus, and the dual moment, literally, of Megatron and his eyes turning red and
Yep.
claiming his name, claiming this new
Yep.
name and identity, and then also Optimus Prime doing the same thing, and you hear him say, "I am Optimus Prime." I mean, we were there. The crowd erupted because it's like, Jesus Christ, this
Yeah.
feels exactly like you would want it to feel. You were
Mm-hmm.
hearing these voices that we've just had such a relationship with, and I don't they probably had some voice modulation support,
Sure.
sure, that's fine, but it worked.
Yeah.
It totally
Yeah.
worked, and we got there, which I couldn't have predicted, but it was one of the more enjoyable aspects of the movie to I guess literally hear these actors sort of dig deep and find that voice within them. And
Mm-hmm.
that was one of my big things coming into this. Like, how are we going to get to, Optimus Prime is probably one of the best motivational speakers we have in pop culture. Like,
Ever.
that guy will get you to run through a fucking brick wall with a speech.
Yep.
Like, it's gonna get there, and we get a speech, towards the end of this movie, and he says Autobots roll out, and it's like, oh yeah, we're
We
on
here.
now, we're here.
Yeah.
So I thought that stuff was amazing. I also just want to ask about the look of them too. We do see the transformation of just the look and the evolution of these different Transformers, as we have
Mm-hmm.
stated. They don't start off with the ability to transform, but then we find out that there's a core, that multiple Transformers can get that allows them to take on these new shapes and to see them transform. How did you feel about that? Because I was wondering how they were going to pull that off. We typically and historically know them to transform into motor vehicular sort of
Mm-hmm.
automobiles, so I was wondering, like, well, how is that going to work on Cybertron? But I guess it made a lot of sense, just like the industrial nature of the planet. Like, it
Right.
heavily leans into the stuff you talked about earlier, like the highway system, the transportation system. Like, it made a lot
Mm-hmm.
of sense that we ultimately reached that place. But how did you feel about the look of the several Transformers once they were ultimately able to achieve that new form?
Yeah, really smart stuff, like you said, because they already doing transportation things. And again, in the live action, we're made to think they don't look like that till they get to Earth, and they're like, wait, I need to be like that thing. Let me transform into that thing. But here they're like, no, there's already cars and things. We got to move things around. There is transportation. We have things that already look like this. So this is how they know to look like this. I thought that was smart. But I like the lore, the small lore stuff, man. Like their cores have been taken by this guy, and they're like, y'all never knew that y'all could transform. There is a cool message there of like, again, your potential was legit taken by somebody. Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't know that you can do this thing, and in this whole time you look up to him because he can do that thing. Amazing. I thought that was really good, and for them to finally be able to turn into Transformers, I thought was to be honest, a lot of it felt like Power Rangers. Of course they had a ton of, you know what I mean? It's like, oh shoot, they got their powers. Like the Power Rangers got their powers. They took a lot of inspiration in this film. I was even, bro, there was like 10 Toy Story things going on. You know what I'm
A
saying? They had
lot,
like
yeah.
10 Toy Story references. I was like, what is going on in this movie? It's a lot of Toy Story. But again, to see them once they get their vehicles, to me, the shoot, the thing is, I thought about first when they first transformed, they couldn't use their vehicles. I was thinking about Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse when Miles didn't know how to use his web that well. I was like, bro, you transform, your head is gone, you ain't got no wheels. What's good? Like, y'all just really tearing this thing up. But it was a fun moment because it was like, yeah, y'all had never transformed before. Of course, you're not going to be able to do this thing on day one or as soon as you get the power. So I thought all of it made sense, man. For the world that they gave us and the lore they gave us, I thought it was pretty cool across the board.
Yeah, I mean they teased it in the trailer that they wouldn't know how to automatically transform, but to see that really within the story of the film and to see them like just unlock that potential, I mean the whole idea behind Transformers is more than meets the eye, and they
Mhm.
reinforce that line throughout the movie that there's so much more to you than you even know. There's more potential. There's more than you can unlock within yourself. And that's why Optimus Prime becomes this really effective leader, pulling that out of people. And and
Mhm.
and, and that sense of discovery that a lot of them have to go through to see what that exactly means. It's a cool theme. It's just like a really resonant idea, and also how that can take you again to different places. If
Yeah.
somebody is a little bit more power hungry or looking for revenge, in the case of what we see with D16 Megatron, like he's going to take that potential and use it for
Mhm.
what we would classify as probably pretty bad things at the end of the day. And I think that that these are things that were not hit over the head, in the film. They don't hit it on the nose to make it just super obvious. I think it's all subtextual stuff that you just
Mhm.
pick up on knowing the lore and the mythology of these characters, but also just like knowing what they're going after from a thematic standpoint. And I thought that was like a real stroke of brilliance to just kind of speak to those things without just completely calling it out whenever they got a
Mhm.
chance to. So even the look and the feel of everybody, when you do see them take shape and reach these new final forms. It was all good looking stuff. I'm like, yeah, this looks really, really terrific. The animation once again stood out here and looked bold and visual and bright. Bumblebee looked great, had the new knives. That stuff was
Yeah.
cool. The
Funny
Optimus
too.
the funny stuff, the Optimus Prime iconic look that you would expect. All of that stuff really, really worked. And so I enjoyed even like their final forms and what they achieved towards the end of the film here. I guess just to like wrap up this particular portion of the conversation,
Mhm.
ultimately, if they were to do another one of these animated films, if we were to get
Mhm.
another one, what hopes and expectations would you have potentially out of a sequel film? Because I anticipate they would stick to the Cybertronian aspect of it. Like I don't necessarily anticipate we'll all of a sudden throw in humans. I read
Right.
somewhere that this takes place 3 billion years before they arrive to Earth.
God damn.
I can't even comprehend that. What does that even mean?
Okay.
So humans are nowhere in sight. I say that to say that. But yeah, if we were to get another movie, what would you want to see out of a sequel film to Transformers One?
Uh man. Get us to that war for Cybertron, man. Whatever that road looks like for them, we now have very clearly, well, it could even be more clear, I think, if you establish and come up with a new movie, but of Autobots and Decepticons, right? Like, get us into that feel of what that means and concept means. Continue to introduce some of the Transformers we know and love with the sound waves and your RCs and you know what I mean, like all these different Transformers. And yeah, just give us another, I think, compelling story for us to, I think, once again realize why the relationship between Optimus and Megatron is so it's complicated. You know, again, a lot of the depictions I've seen, shoot, even the live action movies, I'm like, oh, they just don't like each other. Megatron's bad, end of the story, you know what I mean? But continuing, I think, to make that relationship even more complicated and not as black and white as it may seem, I think it can still make for cool stories, especially the lore that they're giving us with the primes and this new found Cybertron, having to see different corners of what this world is to look like. I mean, they showed us a ton of stuff on what Cybertron was on the surface. I was like, what the hell is going on? Like, why are these mountains moving? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are all of these rock things? I think there's really cool things they can still do with that world. So maybe just exploring some of that stuff and then continue to flesh out a story between these rivals that is shoot for more than meets the eye. So continuing to do some of that stuff, man, I think can still make for another compelling story.
Yeah, I think the war for Cybertron is I think the most obvious place to go because we've yet to really do that. That's just
Hmm.
something that everybody wants to see it. Everybody wants that to be a thing that we can see for like an entire movie. It could certainly last for an
Yeah.
entire movie. So that just feels like, I think, what should be the obvious next step. And so, if we do another one of these, I would be surprised if that was not it. But to your point, the whole dichotomy and relationship between Megatron and Optimus Prime, it just has to go to even deeper, darker, further places. There can always be the push and pull. Like, there's probably going to be the desire on both of their parts to want to reunite and be on the same page again,
Hmm.
and work together. But for whatever reason, that's just not going to be the case. There's always going to be something that puts them on separate paths, and so I think that that's something that you can just always go back to. It'll never get old. It'll always be a thing. And let's not forget, there's tons of just different generations of Transformers. Like, there's just not the Autobots and
Exactly.
Decepticons. There's the
That's true.
Predacons. There's all sort of the
Hmm.
Maximals. Like, I mean, there's
Yep.
just, this can go so deep if they wanted to, if it could be successful enough to continue that through line. There's just so many other generations of Transformer stuff that we can visit in new movies. Want to rank these films, 9
Yeah.
Transformers movies. Again, starting with the Transformers the movie. It's one of the weirdest titles for a film ever. It's literally called The Transformers the movie. They came out in 1986, and then of course all the live action films, 5 of them being from Michael Bay. We had the spin-off Bumblebee movie. We just got Rise of the Beasts last year as well, which we did review on the podcast, and of course now Transformers 1. Want to rank these movies and just sort of do our individual rankings of them from the worst to the best, and rank them in
Yeah.
in that way. So what will be at the bottom of your list? What do you think is the worst Transformers movie that we've gotten so far?
Transformers: The Last Night. I don't even think it's just like
Awful.
what what is what I don't even know what that movie is, bro. But Mark Wahlberg's and Josh Duhamel and Stanley Tucci. It's funny. You're like, oh yeah, those are all decent people. And then it's like, but what is this movie? It makes Anthony Hopkins. I don't know, bro. Whatever. It's just at the
Yeah,
bottom of the list.
they went to some British medieval shit in the movie. It is, yeah, it's at the bottom of my list too. It's
No
it's
thanks.
it's an atrocious movie, and I hated watching it because for whatever reason Michael Bay decided to use like 7 different aspect ratios, and it changes like every 6 seconds, especially in the action sequences. Like, you're going from this
Yeah.
aspect ratio to this, and then back to this, and then to like
Hmm.
it's such a jarring experience. Like, it's nothing is legible at all. And I got to give credit to Transformers 1. Like, all the action very legible. You can easily
Hmm.
make out what's happening. This movie, it
Hmm.
doesn't do it. So yeah, it's at the bottom of my list too. What about the next one, number 8?
Age of Extinction.
Yep, same
So
one here.
and part of the thing about Age of Extinction was like, oh my god, we have dinosaurs, and then they
Mm-hmm.
do nothing with them. Oh my god, it's like the craziest thing to me. It just drives me insane. We'll get there, but kind of similar thing with Rise of the Beast is like, no, we're not doing Beast Wars and do nothing with Beast, but it's a little bit different. But here was like, oh my god, dinosaurs. I don't know how you just I don't know. They just messing up. They got the recipes and then they cook it. They just put wrong ingredients. It's just the craziest thing to me, man. It's weird.
They were there for like what, 3 minutes at the end of the movie. It's like, okay, Optimus is gonna ride the back of one of them, and then that's really kind of the end of it.
That's it.
Just a strange choice. I mean, Age of Extinction, like the other movies were already, I mean, the quality was dramatically decreasing by that point. Age of Extinction was really I think
Yeah, it
that
was
was
like
the first time where I'm like, oh no. I'm like,
yeah.
oh no, this is just,
Yep.
and it was equally confounding that it made $1 billion at the box office. It was the highest grossing movie of that year.
Blows my mind.
That was not the case for The Last Night. I think people, finally have reached their limit, but the fact that so many people showed up to what I would consider is probably a cinematic pile of trash, said a lot about our movie going audience at that particular time. But yeah, I have to agree. Let's keep moving. What's next?
Revenge of the Fallen.
We're,
Uh
we're 3 for 3 here. Same
yeah.
exact order.
Man, this movie is, I mean, also bad editing. The
Yeah.
the old Transformer had balls. Make that make sense. The you it the only saving grace I think for this movie is like, this is the one, not like Age of Extinction and The Last Night. Those are just bad. This is the one you can watch because it's so bad it's funny. Like, you're like, okay, I can laugh at some of these things. Like, this is ridiculous. I don't know what we're doing, but all around, just a terrible film. Very bad plot. across. Yeah, just not a good movie.
Yeah, laugh at the extremely racist stereotypical twin robots that we had early in the movie.
Right.
Yeah, the dangling balls moment, which was just Michael Bay. What were we doing, my good sir? This was just levels of what the fuck filmmaking. Even at a younger age, I was questioning like, what are we doing here? Like, I know that this is not
Yeah.
Citizen Kane, but Jesus Christmas, can we try? Can we put in some effort and just not go to the lowest common denominator? All the jokes,
Mhm.
all the shots, everything was just, it just felt so rudimentary. It just felt like there was no effort here, and it probably wasn't a ton of effort because they turned that movie around so quickly. Like those first three, they made them all within 4 years of each other because the studio, I think, just
Mhm.
wanted to churn them out quickly, and you can tell that they were rush productions for sure. So yeah,
Yeah.
this is at the same spot for me. What's next for you at number 6?
Number 6, I have. So this one is like 6 and 5 are pretty close to each other, but I just for recency bias, I got Rise of the Beast here. At my
Yep.
number 6 spot. And yeah, all the things I talked about. Thing is about Rise of the Beast, it's not a terrible movie. There are worse movies out there for sure than Rise of the Beast, but
Worst
it does
Transformers
not.
movies.
Yeah, it is worse Transformers movies, but it is not. It just it doesn't hit on its promise at all. It's no, you don't, all this Beast Wars marketing and like we're gonna do this and that, and they don't do none of it. No Predacons, no. I just don't know why it had to be a Rise of the Beast movie at the end of the day. I thought we were going to do more with that. It was very short lived with any Beast thing they were doing in that film to me. Yeah, they should have went for it. They didn't really go for it. They tried to play it safe and it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I was not a fan of this movie. I was pretty agitated watching it. I still haven't revisited it since we saw it and reviewed it last year, just because I was like, we're kind of back to the same old thing, that we dealt with for
Yeah.
like a decade. It didn't feel genuine. It didn't feel fully explored and fleshed out, and it felt just distracted with these mostly uninteresting human characters, that we were, kind of following here. And again, the premise, it's like we're not even following up on the promise of something that people have been waiting on for such a long time, and we're just kind of missing the mark there for whatever reason. I don't know if it was, budgetary stuff or whatever the case may be, but it was
Mhm.
just untapped potential. There were some signs of comprehensible filmmaking where it's like, okay, there's some lessons that have been learned from the history of this franchise, but
Yeah.
not to the degree that would make it a good movie or a rewatchable movie in that respect. And so yeah, it's also here for me too.
Mhm.
What's next? Number 5.
Number 5, Dark of the Moon.
Okay, we'll probably have the
Hey,
same list here.
the same list probably. But a decent movie actually. Well, the thing is about Dark of the Moon. One, it's still jarring to like turn this movie on and it's Rosie Huntington and not Megan Fox. That will always be like a
Always a weird
what
thing.
happened.
Yeah.
Always be like a what happened thing. Not only that, but they like kind of tried to make her a villain. I don't. And for a second, it was like, oh, what is happening here? But I think if this movie actually hadn't had Rosie Huntington, this might have been a better movie. You know what I mean? Like there might have been more to actually discuss in this movie or not waste time in this film. But I really like the Chicago scene at the end of the film. There's something about it. I was like, huh, y'all are actually kind of cooking. This is when like these of course, yeah, this is when like the visual style of these movies are already established. And I was like, it looks cool. I'm okay with it. And I just thought they were going for another crazy third act. So yeah, this is where it is. It's not the worst of the Transformers movies to me. It's not the best, but it's like right in the middle.
They fucked Chicago all the way up.
They tore
They
that thing
they
up.
held nothing back for Chicago. I remember I was in college at the time. I went back to, everybody that was in Chicago back at University of Missouri. I'm like, yo, have you seen Transformers? You ain't got a home, my guy. This movie just had no respect for y'all city. It was crazy how much damage they did. Yeah, this was the particular era of movies where these big budget tentpole live action movies were just leveling cities and not taking any
Mhm.
accountability for the repercussions. And by the time Man of Steel came out, people had enough. Like, you can't fuck up a city to that degree and it's just cool, bro. Like, no. This movie did it. The Avengers did it the next year with New York, and then
Mhm.
once Metropolis and Man of Steel, I mean, that just took it to another level. I think everybody was like, "Hey, bro, y'all just murdered probably like 7,000 people, and we're only about 10 years removed from 9/11 here. Can we address this?" And I think we've gotten a little too shy lately with like just fucking up a city. Like I want to kind of get back to that and just kind of get back to that being a
Mhm.
battleground. But this really started it to a big degree. But the 3D, I remember this being a big 3D movie too. You know,
Oh, yeah.
huge push for 3D. I saw it in 3D. And
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of 3D by any means, but I do remember watching this in 3D thinking like, oh, that was actually pretty good.
Mhm.
You know, it's one of the few examples where that would happen. But yeah, it's watchable because of that big third act action set piece. Some of the moon sequences are kind of cool and how they tie that
Mhm.
in, but all the stuff in the middle with the character shit and like you say, Rose coming in here and I mean, I don't know what they were thinking. Like the Patrick Dempsey character, John Malkovich is just like he's in another world in this movie. I don't know what's happening with these guys. I'm just like this doesn't belong, but that's the goofy campiness of what Michael Bay was going for. So you know it was what it was. But yeah, let's keep moving. Let's get to the top four. What's next on your list?
I have Bumblebee here, which is it's a good movie. It's a good movie. It's different. It has such a different feel than the rest of the Transformers films, right? Bumblebee is still animated in that same, of course, style. Like it's still pretty much the same everything in that way, but very different movie. Like they have to model him after an old car. It takes place in what 87. And Haley Steinfeld was really good. You know, she's a good actress, and she was good to lead this film. And yeah, there's actually something to it. I love how it's smaller scale, and it just feels better than a lot of the other Transformers films, probably because it is more focused on Haley and the relationship between her and Bumblebee and what they have going on in the greater scheme of the story, man. So yeah, this is at my fourth spot.
Yeah. I have Bumblebee in my third spot. You know, all the things you said, 100% true. I just like the smaller focus story at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Get away from all the chaos and the madness, all the bullshit, all the garbage that was just thrown at us and just like focus on two characters, really their relationship. Felt like a coming of age 80s movie, you know, very much in the vein of those movies that came out at that time. I thought it was pretty good. It was a pleasant surprise. And four for me is the first Transformers movie in '07,
Mhm.
which listen, I don't know where you have it on your list, but you know, this was a movie I do remember at the time, you know, first seeing it in 2007, being in the movie theater. Wow, oh wow. It was like, oh my god, this is something we can achieve on screen. It felt like it opened up a new world of possibilities from a visual perspective. Like the CGI was almost revolutionary. This
Mhm.
movie actually inspired Marvel Studios to feel confident that they could pull off Iron Man in live
Yep.
action, you know. So it was pretty transformative, no pun intended, for that particular purpose. Um, upon reflection, for me, the years have not done this movie well. It is the best of the original live action ones that came out.
Yeah.
Save for Bumblebee for me on my list, but I look back and I see the fucking seeds that were sown by Michael Bay that he ultimately got away with for the next four movies. Like the things that were not checked at all in this movie, it's like, oh, that's where this started. It started in this movie. Oh my god! And yeah, nobody's gonna say anything to Michael Bay. It's Michael Bay. You know, he's one of the most powerful, influential directors in Hollywood. And you know, I can still watch this one and find
Mhm.
things out of it. And I still that last battle in I think it was L.A. Amazing stuff. That was still like a really great battle that they had at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
But I will say, upon reflection, it's one of those ones it didn't age the best for me over the years.
This is number 3 on my list. I'm not gonna lie to you. I love this movie still. I do. I think it's funny. Like you said, it's revolutionary for the way it looked. It's a slow build up at the beginning, actually. Like we actually have to get to like the way the Decepticons come to Earth, and like Bumblebee, of course, finds Sam, but like he doesn't know he's a Transformer yet. Like I like that whole thing. I think it's really fun way to get into it. What's really funny about this movie is just hella sweaty. Everybody is sweating all the time. But there's comedic moments like when the Transformers end up at Sam's house and the dad goes under the table and she's like, "How'd you get down there so fast?" I think it's hilarious. I don't know. I think it's a really funny movie. And yeah, it looked good. Peter Cullen comes in and it's just like, I also have a very vivid memory of seeing my mom taking me to see this movie, and I was like, "Damn, I like that movie." And it was something about it that just, I don't know, it felt good and resonated with me. Even upon rewatch, I'm like, I know the words to some of the moments. And it's like, "Are you ladies, man? 217." Hilarious. I don't know. I really like this movie. I think it's great. But yeah, it's in my third spot.
Top two here. Second spot for me, Transformers One, the new one.
Yep.
Just talked
Yep.
all about that. Number one, the Transformers the movie.
Same order. Same order. The
Same order,
Transformers the movie.
yeah, same order. Say, the only thing we would swap is Bumblebee in the first one in
3 and 4.
07.
Yep.
But yeah, look, the Transformers the movie, that soundtrack is bitching. That is an amazing
Bruh.
soundtrack in that movie.
Yes.
My
Yes,
God.
yes,
Let's
yes. It's
start
so hard.
there. It's just incredible music. I still don't know why we haven't gotten completely back there. Like, let's just throw in like the best pop culture hits we can.
Bruh.
They kind of touched on it in that 07 live action movie, kind of like very briefly with the Bumblebee stuff, but they don't lean all the way in. But man, they just had so much incredible music. But listen, the thing about this movie is that it was following up the series at the time. And, as a young kid watching this movie for the first time, to see them kill Optimus Prime, it's like, oh no, what are we doing here? That was
Yeah.
just such a pivotal moment and just such a ballsy thing to do. For any property at that time, you're just not used to seeing the hero of a franchise just be killed off in that way. Now we know he came back, obviously, but the moment that it happened, it's really effective. And I think for a lot of kids who saw it either when it came out, who came of age at that time, or watched it later in life, like I did, if you didn't know that going into it, it was like, whoa, they're going to a different place here entirely. You just don't see it really coming. And the franchise as a whole, still to this day, even with Transformers 1, has yet to take a risk like that, yet to take a risk as big as that was. And I was hoping that they were going to get a moment like that in Transformers 1. I was hoping we were going to do something like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. It can still happen in the future, but I got to put this first one at the top. It's a classic film, classic animated movie, classic movie for the franchise as a whole. And it still holds up wonderfully to this day.
It does, man. It still feels so good. And like, when you go back and watch, I can't explain it. I know it's a child film. This is gonna sound crazy. I know it's a child's film, but it's like it has cocaine in it. Like, it's like it feels like the 80s. You know what I'm saying? Like, it still feels like the 80s. Like you said, the music is crazy. The colors are vibrant, and you're just like, this movie is tight, bro. Like, what are we doing? Like, it makes me still question, like, what have we been doing in some of these other films? And like you said, it makes me miss when like music was that, like, music, like, put music in your movies, make your music important in these movies, man. And sometimes they just don't do it. That's one of the things low key that makes Spider-Verse so crazy. The music is good in Spider-Verse, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's an important part of the movie. And Transformers the movie was doing that, man. They had the music, they had the feel. It was definitely reminiscent of what they were doing in the cartoon at the time. You know what I'm saying? It's just, they were killing it, man. They were killing it in that movie. And so yeah, that's my number one in two spot as well.
How about that 4K restoration that they just did for it too, which they released, I think, before Rise of the Beast came out last year. I watched it when it came. I was like, oh my God, this just creates new life for it.
Beautiful, bro.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I had the Blu-ray, but that 4, I'm like, yeah, y'all really ate here. Yeah, it's just such a just a staple, I think, for a lot of people. Like you say, it is a kids movie, but it definitely felt like that they were just like, let's just go for it. Let's just create like the maximal sort of experience for a Transformers movie. It's going to be the most Transformers movie you've ever seen, and it still kind of is to this day, 36 years later. As we wrap up here, I do just want to talk about quickly the state and the future of the Transformers franchise, because Transformers 1, it didn't do the best at the box office, which I do think it's unfortunate. Early projections were tracking it at somewhere between $30 and $35 million domestically for the opening weekend, but it only opened to $25 million domestically. In fact, it came in second place. It wasn't even the number one movie. Beetlejuice actually beat it out and won the number one spot at the box office, just barely, with $26 million. And so, not necessarily the greatest sign from the opening weekend standpoint, but there's always potential that it could leg out and maybe do well over the next few weeks. I'm having my fingers crossed that that's the case, but considering that the performance isn't the greatest and it might have executives at Paramount second guessing the decision, and also knowing that the Rise of the Beast movie last year somewhat underperformed as well, and I guess there's still that lingering crossover G.I. Joe Transformers movie that they're probably developing. I don't know. What's your overall outlook for the franchise? Do you think that they should still try to continue to do both live action and animations? Should we lean more heavily into the animation. I mean, it didn't make a ton of money, but apparently the budget was only 75 billion, so they were able to keep the cost low, which might be a saving grace for it. What's your outlook on just like what the future could look like for this franchise, and is it even viable anymore? Do people even care about
Mhm.
Transformers anymore after all the years of having a ton of success? But it seems like now things are just not, they're not in the place that they used to be.
First, leave live action alone. Leave out live action alone. Like you said, the GI Joe Transformers thing going to happen with or without us saying this, but leave live action alone. And focus on those animated features for a little bit. Figure out the footing there. And even though Transformers One didn't do good right now in the box office, I can imagine. Let's say this comes out on streaming, and people are like, "Wait a second, I actually wanted to watch this. I just didn't feel like going to go see it. I didn't trust Transformers anymore. I wasn't really about it. But when it gets on Netflix or Max or wherever, I'd watch it. If that gets enough eyeballs and people, I think, can buy into that idea of Transformers One being a good movie. um keep going with the animation. I think the next one might have more people watch it. You know what I mean? Transformers is still has a big fan base. I think a decent amount of fan base. Shoot, the Age of Extinction last night didn't happen that long ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's people out there who still like Transformers. Just I think over time a lot of that quality degraded, and people and things became more expensive, and now people want to put their money into other things that isn't Transformers property and project. So I think let the Transformers One speaks for itself. Leave live action alone, and hopefully, try to get that animation division together and have something that we can trust. You know what I'm saying? We haven't been able to trust the concept to really for Transformers for a very long time, or what those movies were supposed to be. So get people to buy into that first, and I think everything will follow.
Um, and do you think people even care about Transformers at this point anymore? Things have changed. I mean, once it was the biggest franchise in Hollywood for a long time. Marvel happens, DC
Marvel
happens.
happened. Yeah.
Some bad movies that they make happen. A lot
Hmm.
changed, right? And
Yeah.
and and we're seeing decreasing returns. Do you think people are even invested in this particular franchise at this? It'll be around forever. I mean, it's not going to go away. Just
Right.
the strength of it exists on the toy line alone. But from a movie going perspective, do you think people even are interested in Transformers at this point?
I don't think not right now. I don't think right now they are. I really don't. Do I think I can change? Yeah, I think that can change. But to put it simply, I think right now they don't care right now. And yeah, it's to all those reasons you said.
The sins of the past, they will come back. I mean, you just give
Yeah.
us some shit for so long. I mean, people are gonna eventually be like, I'm okay.
Mhm.
On the flip side of things, as a comp, Spider-Man and the Spider-Man franchise, and then what they were able to do with Into the Spider-Verse. Now, the box office for that movie didn't necessarily light the world on fire, but look, that movie cost about
Right.
90 million. It made 384 million. That's a huge success for a first movie, an animated Spider-Man feature film that they hadn't done before, became a critical darling. I think that that's a testament to the fact that the Spider-Man franchise had been taken care of. We've
Hmm.
said numerous times on this podcast, there are a few franchises that cannot afford to mess up, right?
Gotta take
Spider-Man is
care
one
of
of
it.
them. Batman
Yep.
is another one. Like, you have to, and the moment that they realized that they were on the path of it going left with the Amazing Spider-Man movies, they had to pivot quickly, and they
Hmm.
did, right? And so for that movie to perform the way that it did into the Spider-Verse, I think is a testament to a smart, intelligent pivot that they were able to make with Tom Holland. Transformers hasn't had that opportunity. They did put out bad movie after bad movie after bad movie, and I think now we're seeing sort of the repercussions of that. But I think that if this movie can perform even similar to what Mutant Mayhem did,
Hmm.
which also cost I think about 70 million, also another Paramount movie, ended up making about $180 million. Again, not the hugest return on that investment, but I think decent enough to justify more, right? I
Yeah.
think I think if it can get to 180, even 200, on a 70 $75 million budget, we're working with some leeway there to greenlight another movie, to go down, for news stories, and hopefully find a bigger audience in the next follow-up film. And hopefully streaming can help feed that as well, and do a really good job at getting new viewers and new fans that can hop on board. But yeah, I think right now people are just kind of checked out with the franchise because we got terrible stuff for such a long time, and so they have
Hmm.
to They got to do more to win people back. And so we'll see, if this gets a green light for a sequel and ultimately whatever happens on the live action standpoint, they really got to do something even more with that one. Like animation has more flexibility. I feel like live action, yeah, that's a rough playing field right now for them. So I don't know what that crossover film will look like, but if that's the answer to their prayers, we'll ultimately have to see when it does come out. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new Transformers feature film, Transformers 1. If you've checked this out in theaters, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.